For 20 years. I lived a lie. My children thought I was a pathetic old man living off their charity, paying rent in the very house I bought with $2 million of lottery money I never told them about. And when they finally decided I was too much of a burden, I decided it was time to cash in my final ticket, the deed to their entire world. This is the story of how I took back my dignity. If you believe that respect is the minimum price of admission in a family, stick around. The first thing I notice every morning is the silence. It's a heavy, hollow kind of silence that fills the cavernous spaces of a house built for a family, but now only occupied by ghosts and resentments. The coffee machine gurgles to life. It's sputtering, the only sound in the vast granite and stainless steel kitchen. It's a sound I've come to associate with loneliness. I pulled 2 ceramic mugs from the cupboard out of habit. One white. One, a deep shade of blue. The blue one was Helen's. 20 years in this house. And for the first 10, she was the one filling these mugs. Now, I just fill my own. The blue one sits on the counter, a clean, unused monument to a time when this kitchen was filled with laughter instead of this crushing quiet. The smell of dark roast coffee began to fill the air. A small comfort. Just as I was pouring, I heard footsteps on the grand staircase. Not the light, cheerful steps of my granddaughter, Lily, but the hurried, purposeful clicks of my daughter's heels. Chloe. She swept into the kitchen, already dressed in a sharp business suit, her phone pressed to her ear. Her husband, Derek, followed a moment later, scrolling through something on his own phone, a smirk plastered on his face from some video he was watching. Neither of them looked at me. It was as if I were a piece of furniture, a grandfather clock ticking away the minutes to my own obsolescence. No. Tell them the quarterly projections are unacceptable, Chloe said into her phone, grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl. I don't care what the excuse is. Make it happen. She ended the call and tossed the phone onto the counter. Derek grunted in amusement at whatever was on his screen. They moved around me in their own orbits, their worlds completely separate from mine. I held out the white mug. Coffee, I asked. My voice sounded rough in the quiet. Chloe glanced at the mug, then at me, her eyes holding a flicker of something I knew all too well: annoyance. I have to run. Dad, I'll grab a latte on the way. Derek didn't even look up. Keto diet. Chester. No sugar. No cream. He called me Chester, not Dad, not even by my first name with any warmth. Just Chester, like the guy who trims the hedges. I placed the mug back on the counter next to Helen's. 2 empty mugs. It was a perfect metaphor for my life these days. I looked at the empty chair at the head of the kitchen island, the one Helen used to sit in. For a split second, I could almost see her there, sunlight catching the silver in her hair, her laugh echoing as she told a silly story about one of the kids. He remembered lazy Sunday mornings, the smell of pancakes, the sound of tiny feet running down the hall. We had built this house to be a home, a sanctuary, a place where our family would grow and thrive. Helen would be heartbroken if she could see what it had become. The memory vanished as quickly as it came, erased by the sharp slap of paper on the granite countertop. I flinched. Chloe had tossed an envelope in front of me. It was the monthly utility bill. Speaking of which, she said, her voice crisp and businesslike, we need to talk about your contribution. Things are getting more expensive. The mortgage rates, the taxes, everything. Your rent is going up to $1,500 a month, starting next week. I stared at the bill. Then at her. The words caught in my throat. Your rent. The phrase was a dagger, twisting in a wound that never healed. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to scream it. I wanted to say, there is no mortgage. Chloe. I paid for this house in cash with $2 million from a lottery ticket I bought on a whim the year you graduated college. I own this roof over your head. I own these granite countertops you slap your demands on. But I didn't. The habit of keeping the peace, a promise I made to Helen on her deathbed to always keep the family together, was too deeply ingrained. My jaw tightened, and I felt a familiar, hot pulse behind my eyes. I could feel Derek's eyes on me now. Enjoying the show. He and Chloe saw me as nothing more than a dependent, a tenant in their gracious home, a burden they had to manage. I just nodded. A single, slow nod of acquiescence. A satisfied look crossed Chloe's face. Good. I'm not running a charity here. Dad. She grabbed her briefcase, gave Derek a quick peck on the cheek, and walked out without another word. Later that night, the house was quiet again. The sounds of Chloe and Derek's television drifted up from the living room. Adieu, monotonous drone. I sat in my room. The one room in this house that still felt like mine. It was filled with old books, photographs of Helen, and the worn leather armchair she'd bought me for my 50th birthday. From the back of my closet, I pulled out an old wooden box. It wasn't locked, but it felt heavier than its contents. The scent of cedar and old paper wafted out as I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled beneath a stack of photos of the kids when they were young and full of smiles, were two documents. One was the faded, folded lottery ticket from 2004. The other was the original deed to the house at 12 Oak Ridge Drive. My name, Chester Miller, was printed clearly in black ink. I ran my thumb over my signature. This piece of paper was my secret. It was my strength. It was the proof that I was not the feeble, dependent old man they saw me as. For years, I held on to it, telling myself that one day, when the time was right, I would tell them. I would reveal my secret, not as a weapon, but as a gift, a final legacy. But that day never seemed to come. The respect I thought it would earn me felt further away than ever. A few days later, my son, Mark, came to visit. He lived across town, but his visits were infrequent and always had a purpose. He found me in the backyard, pruning Helen's rose bushes. He didn't offer to help. Hey, Dad, he said, stuffing his hands in his pockets. Mark, good to see you. How are things? He shrugged. You know, busy. We stood in an awkward silence for a moment. The snip of my shears, the only sound. Then he got to it. Listen, I was wondering if you could help me out. I have this investment opportunity. A sure thing. But I'm a little short on the capital. I need $5,000. I stopped pruning and looked at him. His eyes darted around, never quite meeting mine. He saw me as they all did an ATM, a faulty one, in his opinion. Mark, you know my situation, I said softly. I'm on a fixed income. I don't have that kind of money just lying around. His face soured. The friendly facade dropped instantly, replaced by the familiar look of entitled disappointment I had seen so many times before. Right, he scoffed. Your fixed income. You know, for a guy who always talked about sacrifice, you've always been pretty selfish with your money. You were never really there for us when it mattered. And you're still not. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Selfish. I had worked 2 jobs for a decade after Helen got sick to pay her medical bills and keep food on the table for him and Chloe. The lottery win had come too late to save her. But it had been my chance to give my children the life I never had. A life without financial worry. And this was my reward. To be called selfish by the son who had no idea what that word even meant. Before I could respond, he just shook his head and walked away. Already typing something into his phone. Another transaction completed. Another withdrawal from an account that had long been emotionally bankrupt. That evening, I was sitting in my armchair. The silence of my room, a welcome refuge. When there was a gentle knock on the door. It was Lily, my 16-year-old granddaughter. She was the only one who ever knocked. She came in carrying a steaming mug. "I made you some tea." "Grandpa," she said, her voice soft. She was the spitting image of Helen. She handed me the mug and sat on the ottoman at my feet. "I heard what Uncle Mark said earlier, and what Mom's been saying. It's not fair." She placed a hand on my arm. And the simple, honest warmth of her touch felt like the first ray of sunshine after a long winter. She was the one good, pure thing left in this family. The only one who saw me, not my perceived utility. "Thank you, sweetheart," I whispered, my throat thick. But her kindness was just a brief reprieve. A few days later, as the calendar crept toward Thanksgiving, Chloe cornered me in the upstairs hallway. Her arms were crossed, her expression as hard as stone. "I've spoken with Mark," she said. "No preamble, no emotion. We've made a decision. Your new rent is $2,000 a month, not $1,500. We feel that's more than fair for what you get here. If that's a problem, then you have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. The choice is yours." She didn't wait for an answer. She just turned and walked into her master suite, closing the door behind her with a soft, final click. I stood alone in the hallway, the words hanging in the air like poison. 30 days. She had given me an ultimatum. An eviction notice, wrapped in the guise of a choice. I looked at the family photos hanging on the wall, smiling faces from Christmases and birthdays past. They were portraits of a family that no longer existed. In its place was this cold, transactional arrangement, and I was a liability they were about to liquidate. That night, sleep was a stranger. I lay in bed, staring at the patterns the moonlight made on the ceiling through my window. The house was finally still, the drone of the television long silenced. But my mind was a raging sea. Chloe's words echoed in the darkness. 30 days. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a timer, ticking down on the life I had known. For years, I had held on to a sliver of hope, a foolish, flickering belief that beneath their greed and resentment, my children still loved me. I thought that if I just stayed quiet, if I didn't make waves, if I continued to play the part of the harmless old man living on their good graces, that flicker of love would one day reignite. But as I lay there, listening to the old house creak and settle around me, I felt that flicker finally extinguish. It didn't die with a dramatic flare, but with a quiet, cold finality. They weren't pushing me out to make room for their lives, they were erasing me from theirs. I had spent years absorbing their casual cruelty, their thoughtless barbs, their complete and utter disregard for my presence. I had mistaken their tolerance for affection. I had been a fool. The promise I made to Helen, to keep the family together, had been twisted into a justification for my own subjugation. She would have never wanted this. She would have wanted me to stand up for myself. The first light of dawn began to creep into the room, painting the walls in shades of gray and pale blue. I rose from the bed, my joints aching, and walked to the bathroom. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The face staring back was tired, etched with lines of grief and disappointment. But for the first time in a long time, the eyes were clear. The fog of hope and denial had lifted, and what was left was a stark, cold clarity. The man in the mirror was not a tenant. He was not a burden. He was the owner of this house. He was the architect of their comfortable lives. And he was done being silent. A new feeling began to coalesce in my chest, displacing the ache of betrayal. It was resolve, a solid, unyielding core of it. They wanted the house. They can't have what was never theirs. After my shower, I didn't go down to the kitchen. I stayed in my room and pulled out an old, leather-bound address book from my desk drawer. It was filled with Helen's elegant cursive names and numbers of people we hadn't spoken to in years. But I wasn't looking for an old friend. I was looking for a professional. My finger traced down the page until it landed on a name, David Chen. Realtor. We had met him at a charity dinner a decade ago. Helen had liked him. She said he had honest eyes and a firm handshake. That was good enough for me. I dialed the number, my heart beating a steady, determined rhythm. It was early, but he answered on the second ring. David Chen. His voice was professional, alert. Mr. Chen. My name is Chester Miller. We met a number of years ago, through my late wife, Helen. There was a brief pause. Chester. Of course. I remember Helen fondly. A wonderful woman. What can I do for you? I need to sell a house, I said, my voice as steady as my pulse. My house. And it needs to be done quickly, and with the utmost discretion. Another pause. This one longer. I understand, he said, his tone shifting. Sensing the gravity in my words. When and where can we meet? We agreed to meet the next day at a small coffee shop 10 miles from my neighborhood, a place where I was certain I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. I spent the rest of the day in a state of quiet purpose, moving through the house like a ghost. Chloe and Derek were oblivious, wrapped up in their own worlds. They saw my silence not as the calm before a storm, but as the defeated acceptance they expected. The coffee shop was bustling, the air thick with the smell of roasted beans and steamed milk. David was already there, sitting at a small table in the corner. He stood as I approached, his handshake just as firm as I remembered. His eyes were indeed honest. They were sharp, intelligent, and missed nothing. After we exchanged brief pleasantries, I didn't waste any time. From my briefcase, I pulled out a copy of the deed and slid it across the table. He picked it up, his eyebrows rising slightly as he read the name and the address. 12 Oak Ridge Drive, he said, looking at me over the top of the paper. That's a prime property in a very desirable neighborhood. I wasn't aware it was on the market. It isn't, I said, and no one is to know that it is, especially not the current occupants. David studied my face for a long moment, processing the unspoken parts of my request. He was a professional. He didn't ask questions I didn't want to answer. He simply nodded. Discretion is paramount. I understand. Chester, do you know what this property is worth in the current market? I have a rough idea, I said, but it's been a while. He leaned forward slightly. Based on recent sales in your area, and assuming the property is in good condition, you're looking at a valuation of around $1.2 million, possibly more. If we find the right buyer. I absorbed the number without flinching. Though it was significantly more than I had anticipated, the money wasn't the point. It was the principle. I need a fast sale. David. I reiterated. And a quiet one. No for sale sign on the lawn. No public open houses. I want to show it only to pre-qualified, serious buyers. That will narrow the field. But it's doable, he said, his mind already working. Especially for a property like this. We can list it privately among a network of trusted agents. What's our timeline? 30 days. I said, maybe less. He nodded again. A plan already forming behind his eyes. All right, Chester, let's get to work. Thanksgiving arrived a week later. The house was filled with the rich smells of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie. A cruel parody of the happy family gatherings of the past. Chloe's in-laws were there. Along with a few of her and Derek's friends, Mark came. Acting as if our last conversation had never happened, I played my part. The quiet, benevolent patriarch, sitting at the end of the table. During a lull in the conversation, Chloe's mother-in-law, a woman with a voice like shattering glass, turned to me. So, Chester, what are you thankful for this year? All eyes turned to me. I saw the condescending smiles, the looks of pity. Before I could answer, Chloe laughed. A light, tinkling sound that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, I'm sure Dad is thankful we haven't found a nice nursing home for him yet, she said. Just kidding. Of course. The table erupted in polite laughter. Derek put his arm around her, beaming with pride. Mark chuckled along, avoiding my gaze. In that moment, surrounded by family, he had never felt more alone, but instead of the usual sting of humiliation, I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a scene from a movie. These people were no longer my family. They were characters in a story that was about to reach its final chapter. Lily, sitting next to me, reached under the table and squeezed my hand. Her eyes were filled with a fierce, protective anger that warmed me more than any fireplace could. That night, Lily's loyalty was cemented. She was heading to her room when she overheard her mother talking to Derek in the master bedroom. The door slightly ajar. She couldn't hear everything, but she heard Chloe's voice. Sharp and clear. Just need him gone, Chloe was saying. If he's out of here by Christmas, it'll be the best gift I could ask for. We can finally turn his room into a proper home gym. Lily told me this the next morning, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and sorrow. It broke my heart to see her so hurt, but it also hardened my resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about showing Lily that you don't let people, even family, treat you with disrespect. My secret meetings and calls with David continued. We devised a strategy. He found 3 highly motivated buyers who were looking for a property exactly like mine and were willing to be discreet. The challenge was arranging the showings. I couldn't just have strangers walking through the house. The solution came to me one evening as I watched Derek and Mark arguing passionately about a basketball game on television. An idea, cold and calculated, formed in my mind. A few days later, I approached them. In my hand, I held 2 tickets. I was given these. I said, a partial truth. Courtside seats for the Lakers game next Saturday. I'm too old for that kind of excitement. I thought you two might enjoy them. Their eyes lit up. Greed and excitement washed away any suspicion. They snatched the tickets from my hand already debating which jerseys to wear. For Chloe, I bought a generous gift certificate to a high-end spa she loved. Just a little early Christmas present. I told her, "You work so hard. You deserve a day of pampering." She took it. Arare. Genuine smile, gracing her lips. "Wow. Dad, that's really thoughtful of you." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. And so, on that Saturday, the house was finally mine again. I watched them drive away. A caravan of selfishness. And a profound sense of peace settled over me. An hour later, David arrived with the first potential buyers, a young couple with a baby on the way. My heart hammered against my ribs as I let them in. It felt illicit, like a betrayal. Even though I was the one being betrayed, I stayed in the background, a silent observer in my own home. As they walked through the rooms, their faces full of admiration and hope. They spoke in hushed, excited tones about where they would put the crib, how they would host family holidays. They saw what I once saw, a home, not just a house. I kept checking my watch, my anxiety mounting as the minutes ticked by. I imagined Chloe's spa treatment ending early, Derek and Mark deciding to come home at halftime. After they left, I walked through every room, fluffing pillows, straightening magazines, erasing any trace of their presence, my hands shaking slightly. 2 more showings followed that week, each one a nerve-wracking exercise in subterfuge. Then, on a cold December afternoon, just 10 days before Christmas, my phone rang. It was David. "Chester," he said, his voice tense with excitement. "I have news. Good and interesting." "What is it?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. The young couple, the first ones who saw the house, they loved it. They just submitted an offer. He paused for dramatic effect. "It's all cash. $50,000 over your asking price." A breath I didn't know I was holding escaped my lungs. But that's not the interesting part. David continued. "They're in a bit of a rush. Their current lease is up, and they want to be in a new home for the holidays. Their offer is contingent on one thing: they want to close before Christmas. We're talking 10 days. Chester, max. It's an aggressive timeline, but it's doable. The decision is yours." The phone felt unnaturally heavy in my hand. David's words hung in the air, each one a separate, distinct weight. All cash, over asking, a 10-day close. It wasn't a choice. It was a destiny I hadn't known I was waiting for. The universe had grown tired of my indecision and had just handed me an engraved invitation to my own liberation. There was no room for doubt, no space for the old, familiar hesitation that had kept me a prisoner in my own home for years. "Do it," I said, and my voice was clearer than it had been in a decade. "Accept the offer. David, let's get it done." "Consider it done," he replied, a note of admiration in his professional tone. "I'll send over the initial paperwork for an electronic signature tonight. The clock is officially ticking. Chester, I'll need to schedule a home inspection as soon as possible. That's a non-negotiable for the buyers." "I'll handle it," I said, though I had no idea how. "Just tell me when." After we hung up, a strange calm washed over me. The anxiety was gone, replaced by the sharp, focused energy of a man with a mission. The timeline was aggressive, almost insane, but it was perfect. It gave my children no time to notice anything was amiss. It gave me no time to second-guess myself. The first order of business was finding a place to live. The next morning, telling Chloe I was going for my annual physical, a lie that felt small and insignificant compared to the larger deception at play. I drove to a part of the city I hadn't visited in years. It was a quieter, older neighborhood with large oak trees and small, well-kept apartment buildings. I had appointments to see 3 places, all modest one-bedroom units. As I walked into the first one, the contrast with my current reality was staggering. The entire apartment could probably fit inside my current living room, but it was clean, filled with afternoon light, and featured a small balcony that overlooked a quiet, green park. The property manager, a kind woman named Mrs. Gable, pointed out the features as she spoke. I wasn't just seeing an apartment, I was seeing a future, my future, a life where the only expectations were my own, a life of peace. I didn't need to see the other 2. "I'll take it," I said. I filled out the application on the spot, paid the deposit and first month's rent from a separate bank account I'd maintained for years, and signed a 1-year lease. I had the keys in my hand an hour later, driving away. I felt not a sense of loss for the grand house I was leaving behind, but a profound sense of relief. I was shedding a skin I had outgrown long ago. The next hurdle was the inspection. David called to inform me that the buyer's inspector could come in 2 days. It was a 4-hour process. My mind raced, searching for a plausible lie. It came to me in a flash of inspiration, born of years of listening to Chloe's anxieties about home maintenance. That evening, I approached her in the kitchen. "Chloe," I began, adopting a tone of mild concern. I was talking with a friend of mine, and he was telling me about a terrible termite problem he had. It got me thinking. We haven't had this house checked in years. I think it would be prudent to have a full inspection. You know, foundation, pests, the works, just for our peace of mind. Some insurance policies require it periodically anyway. She looked up from her laptop, her brow furrowed with annoyance at the interruption. "An inspection, Dad? We don't have time for that. It's almost Christmas." "That's precisely why we should do it." I pressed on, my heart hammering. Imagine finding a problem in the dead of winter. It's better to be proactive. I've already called a company. They can be here Thursday morning. She sighed. A long, exasperated sound. "Fine. Whatever. Just make sure you handle it. I have back-to-back meetings all day. And Derek is on the golf course with a client." "Of course," I said, turning away to hide the wave of relief. "I'll take care of everything." The day of the inspection was the most nerve-wracking 4 hours of my life. The inspector, a thorough man named Gary, arrived promptly at 9. I let him in, explaining my fabricated story. He just nodded and got to work. Every creak of the floorboards, every tap of his tools against a wall, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I sat in the kitchen, pretending to read the newspaper, my ears straining for the sound of a car in the driveway. Chloe's meetings were often canceled at the last minute. What if she decided to come home? How would I explain this stranger crawling out of the attic, but she didn't come? Gary finished his work, gave me a verbal, all clear, and left as silently as he had arrived. One more hurdle cleared. With the sale now officially in motion, I had to face the most difficult and dangerous part of the plan: packing. I couldn't just start filling boxes. I had to do it in secret, a little at a time, like a prisoner tunneling his way to freedom. My nights transformed. After the house fell into its usual heavy silence, after I was sure Chloe and Derek were asleep, my room would come alive in the soft glow of a single lamp. I started with the closet. I carefully took down my old suits, the ones I hadn't worn in years, and folded them into a suitcase. I went through drawers, sorting through decades of accumulated life, old ticket stubs, faded letters from Helen, my father's pocket watch. Each item was a memory, a small piece of a life they had deemed insignificant. I bought a set of sturdy moving boxes and kept them hidden in the trunk of my car, bringing them into the house one at a time. Hidden inside large trash bags, I packed the books from my shelves, wrapping each one in newspaper. I took down the photographs from my walls, a picture of Helen and me on our wedding day, a snapshot of the kids splashing in a lake, their faces bright with innocent joy, looking at their younger selves. A pang of sorrow hit me, a ghost of the love I once felt so fiercely. But it was just that a ghost. The people in these photos were gone, replaced by the cold, calculating strangers who lived downstairs. One night, as I was carefully wrapping a small porcelain bird that had belonged to Helen, I heard a creak on the floorboards outside my door. I froze, my blood turning to ice. The doorknob turned slowly. It was Chloe. She stood in the doorway, her face a mask of sleepy confusion, a half-empty glass of water in her hand. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the stack of newspapers on the floor, the noticeable gaps on my bookshelf. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice thick with suspicion. "It's 2 a.m. My mind raced for a plausible explanation. "I couldn't sleep," I said, my voice remarkably calm. "I was just tidying up. You know, getting my things in order before I move out. I want to leave things neat and tidy for you." The suspicion in her eyes faded, replaced by a look of smug satisfaction. The lie had worked because it fed her own narrative, the defeated old man, dutifully preparing for his exile. "Good," she said, her voice softening with condescension. "It'll make it easier to fumigate the room after you're gone." She turned and left, closing the door behind her, oblivious to the fact that she had just walked in on the dismantling of her entire world. I leaned against the wall, my legs weak, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. A few nights later, there was another soft knock on my door. This time, I knew it wasn't Chloe. It was Lily. She came in, her eyes immediately falling on a half-packed box on my bed filled with old photo albums. She didn't look surprised. She looked sad, but resolute. She didn't ask a single question. She simply walked over, picked up an album, and began carefully wrapping it in packing paper. We worked in silence for nearly an hour. A silent, perfect understanding passing between us. She knew I was leaving. She didn't know the details, but she knew I had a plan, and she was on my side. As she was about to leave, she turned and hugged me tightly. "I'm going to miss you, Grandpa," she whispered into my shoulder. "But I'm proud of you." She pulled back, her eyes shining. "I'll come visit you. I promise, wherever you go." Her words were the fuel I needed for the final push. The cruelty of my children reached its peak a few days before Christmas. I was in the living room, reading, when Chloe, Derek, and Mark came in, deep in conversation. They didn't lower their voices. They didn't seem to care that I was there. "The Peloton can go right here, by the window," Derek was saying, gesturing to the space where my armchair currently sat. "Perfect morning light." "Totally," Chloe agreed. And once we get all of Dad's old junk out of his room, we'll have plenty of space for the weight bench and the elliptical. Hey, what are you going to do with that big television in there? Mark asked, his eyes gleaming. I could use it for my man cave. It's all yours, Chloe said with a wave of her hand. Consider it a Christmas present. They were carving up my life right in front of me, dividing the spoils before I was even gone. They talked about me as if I wasn't there. An object, a piece of furniture that was about to be hauled to the curb. I didn't say a word. I just lowered my book slightly, my knuckles white as I gripped the cover. And I let their words wash over me, each one another stone in the foundation of my resolve. The day of the closing was the 23rd of December. The air was cold and crisp. The sky, a brilliant, cloudless blue. I told the family I was going to meet an old army buddy for a long lunch. The lie slipped out easily now. I drove to the title company downtown. My old wooden box containing the original deed on the passenger seat beside me. The office was warm and quiet. David was there, as were the buyers. The young couple I had met weeks ago. They looked nervous and excited, their faces glowing with the promise of a new beginning. We sat around a large mahogany conference table. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Miss Prysons, Albright, walked us through the final stack of documents. When it was my turn, she pushed a final document in front of me and handed me a heavy, expensive-looking pen. Your signature here, Mr. Miller, she said, pointing to the line at the bottom. I picked up the pen. It felt cool and solid in my hand. For a moment, I looked at the faces around the table, the hopeful young couple, the professional realtor, the efficient lawyer. These strangers had shown me more courtesy and respect in the past 10 days than my own children had in 10 years. I thought of Chloe's ultimatum, of Mark's accusations, of Derek's smirk. I thought of 20 years of silence. With a steady hand, I signed my name. The ink flowed smoothly onto the page. A dark, final stroke of a pen that was severing the past and writing the future. As I lifted the pen, I felt a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying lift from my shoulders. It was done. After the handshakes and congratulations, David walked me out. Congratulations, Chester, he said, clapping me on the shoulder. The wire transfer is already in process. The funds should be in your account within the hour. I stood on the sidewalk, the winter sun warm on my face. I had done it. I was free. I took a deep breath of the cold, clean air. It was time to go home. One last time. The drive home was surreal. The familiar streets of my neighborhood, lined with manicured lawns and stately houses, looked different, as if I were seeing them for the first time through a new pair of eyes. They were no longer a part of my world. I was just a visitor passing through. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt light. The car seemed to glide over the asphalt, unburdened. For 20 years, I had carried the weight of my secret, and now it was gone. All that was left was the truth. I pulled into the long, curving driveway of 12 Oak Ridge Drive for the last time. The house stood proud against the winter sky, its large windows glinting in the late afternoon sun. It was a beautiful house, a perfect fortress. But I knew, better than anyone, that the foundations were rotten from the inside out. I walked in through the front door. The familiar scent of lemon polish and Chloe's expensive scented candles filling the air. I could hear voices coming from the living room. I paused in the grand foyer, taking a moment to compose myself. My heart was calm, my hands steady. I was ready. I found Chloe directing Derek, who was struggling to move my leather armchair from its usual spot by the fireplace. Mark was standing by, phone in hand, looking bored. No, more to the left. Honey, Chloe was saying, a hand on her hip. I want to see how the new Peloton will look in that space. It needs the natural light. She saw me, and a flash of irritation crossed her face. Oh, there you are. Where have you been all day? Your friend must be quite the talker. She didn't wait for an answer. Don't forget. Your deadline is this weekend. I trust you've made arrangements. I have, I said, my voice even. Derek grunted with effort, finally shoving the heavy armchair into a corner. This thing weighs a ton, he complained, wiping a hand across his forehead. You've got a lot of junk to move. Chester. I looked at the displaced armchair, the place where I had read hundreds of books, where I had held a sleeping lily as a baby, where I had mourned Helen in the quiet hours of the night. It was just a piece of junk to them. I didn't respond to Derek. Instead, I walked over to the large mahogany coffee table in the center of the room. From my coat pocket, I pulled out a large, plain manila envelope. It wasn't thick, but it felt momentous. I placed it on the table with a soft, definitive thud. The sound cut through their trivial conversation. All three of them turned to look at me. This is for you, Chloe, I said quietly. She eyed the envelope with suspicion. Then, with a hint of amusement, what is this? Your first rent check for your new apartment. A little premature. Don't you think? Just open it, I said, with an exasperated sigh. She snatched the envelope from the table. She ripped it open with an impatient tear, expecting, I'm sure, some sort of pleading letter. A pathetic attempt to beg for more time. She pulled out the small stack of papers inside. I watched her face. It was a study in slow-motion destruction. First, her expression was one of bored condescension as she scanned the top page. Then, a flicker of confusion as her eyes tried to make sense of the legal jargon. She scanned down the page, her eyes widening slightly. She flipped to the second page. Then the third. The color began to drain from her face, leaving behind a sickly, pale white. The smug confidence she wore like a second skin dissolved, replaced by a raw, naked disbelief. Her breathing became shallow, audible in the suddenly silent room. What is this? She whispered, her voice a reedy, unfamiliar sound. Her hands had begun to tremble, the papers rattling softly. This is some kind of sick joke. Derek, sensing the shift in the room, moved to her side and looked over her shoulder. His own smirk vanished, replaced by a gape of astonishment. What the hell, he breathed. Snatching the papers from her, he read through them faster, his face growing darker with each line. This can't be real. The closing documents, the sale price. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fury and panic. The name on the deed. It says Chester Miller. Mark, finally looking up from his phone, pushed himself off the wall. What are you guys talking about? Chloe seemed to find her voice then. A high-pitched, hysterical shriek. He sold the house. Dad sold the house. Mark froze, his face a mask of utter incomprehension. What do you mean? He sold the house. He can't sell your house. And that was when I finally spoke. The words came out not in anger, but with the simple, unshakable weight of truth. It was never her house. "Mark," I said, my voice cutting through the rising panic, "it has always been my house." I let that sink in. I told them everything then. I told them about the lottery ticket I'd bought in 2004. A secret I had kept for 2 decades. I told them how I'd paid cash for this house, putting it in my name, intending for it to be the bedrock of their future, a legacy of my love for them. I told them how I had let them live here, rent-free for years, and then for a token amount, all in the foolish hope that they would show a shred of gratitude, a sliver of respect. "I hoped one day you would grow up," I said, my gaze fixed on Chloe. "I hoped you would see me as your father, not as a fading utility, a monthly expense to be managed, but I was wrong." Chloe was shaking her head, tears of rage and self-pity streaming down her face. "No, no, you can't do this. This is our home, Lily's home. You're a monster. You're a cruel, vindictive old man, destroying your own family." "I didn't destroy our family," I said, and my voice was as cold and hard as the winter ground. "You did. You and your brother destroyed it every time you looked at me with contempt. You destroyed it when you treated my kindness as a weakness. You destroyed it when you handed me an ultimatum, ready to throw me out on the street so you could have a home gym. This isn't revenge, Chloe. This is a consequence." She collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing uncontrollably. Derek stood over her, helpless and pale, running his hands through his hair, his mind clearly racing, trying to process the financial and logistical catastrophe that had just befallen them. Mark had sunk into a chair, his face gray, staring into the middle distance as if he had seen a ghost. They were completely and utterly broken. And in that moment, I felt nothing. Not joy. Not satisfaction. Just a vast, quiet emptiness. The anger I had harbored for years was gone. The hurt had been cauterized. All that was left was the quiet, sterile peace of a battle finally over. Just then, Lily appeared at the entrance to the living room. Drawn by the shouting, she took in the scene, her mother weeping, her uncle in shock, her stepfather pacing like a caged animal. Then her eyes found mine. She walked over to me, past the wreckage of her parents' greed, and silently took my hand. Her small, warm hand in mine was the only thing that felt real in the room. She knew, and she understood. She looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw not pity, but pride. I squeezed her hand, and then let it go. I walked over to the small table by the door and placed my house key on it. The small metallic click was the final sound. "The new owners are a lovely young couple," I said to the room at large. "They'll be taking possession the day after Christmas. I suggest you start packing. I wish you the best of luck." I didn't wait for a response. With Lily at my side, I turned and walked out the front door, leaving behind the beautiful house and the ugly ruins of the family I once had. I didn't look back. The scene shifts. The sun is streaming into a small, bright living room. It's not grand, but it's clean and warm. I'm sitting in my old leather armchair, which fits perfectly by a large window overlooking a park. The air smells of fresh paint and brewing tea. Boxes are still stacked in the corners, but it already feels more like a home than the mansion ever did. Lily is sitting on the floor, carefully unpacking the box of old photo albums. She pulls one out and opens it on her lap. It's a picture of her as a toddler, sitting on my shoulders, both of us laughing into the camera. She smiles. I remember this day. she says softly. We went to the zoo. I smile back. You were fascinated by the monkeys. We sit together in comfortable silence for a while. The afternoon sun warming our faces. My new life is quiet. It's simple. Chloe and Mark have not called. I don't expect them to. Perhaps one day they will understand. But I'm not holding my breath. My peace is no longer dependent on their approval. I look out the window at the children playing in the park below. I am no longer a landlord in a gilded cage. I am not a burden or a tenant. I am just a man. A grandfather. A free man. Sitting in his own chair. In his own home. Drinking tea with the person he loves most in the world. I had to lose a house to find my home. But what I gained was something far more valuable. I gained back myself. And that was worth more than any lottery ticket could ever buy.